young people across Florida are fighting back against flailing presidential candidate Ron DeSantis, who also happens to be the governor of Florida. Just this week, hundreds of students, for example, staged a walkout at Monarch High School in Broward County in support of transgender athletes. The crowd poured onto the school's football field in protest after their principal was reportedly reassigned over allowing a transgender student to play on the girls' volleyball team. This is the latest example highlighting the surge in youth activism within the Sunshine State, which is illustrated in Teen Vogue's new series, Gotta Read, Red Tide. Reporters from the publication traveled around Florida, met with dozens of young Floridians who are dealing with the realities of the governor's far-right policies. Joining me now is Lex McMenamin, news and politics editor at Teen Vogue. Lex, it's an honor to have you here. Thanks for joining me. You know, you've spearheaded the Red Tide series. We were talking before we started your interview about how you've spent time in Florida, and you've spoken to young people, and I wanted to get this right, from Tampa to Tallahassee and Sarasota. A 21-year-old living in Tallahassee said, "The obstacle is just living at this point." I mean, was that a common sentiment that you heard, sadly, as you spoke to these young people?
Over and over and over again. And it's interesting because when you think about the headlines that we see out of Florida, right, they're very oriented around DeSantis or individual politicians or sort of the architects of the campaigns that he's been running. So like Christopher Rufo, for example, the man who is definitely to blame for the anti-critical race theory, quote unquote, campaigns that we've seen across the country for the last several years. He was appointed to become a part of the board of trustees for New College of Florida, which is in Sarasota. That's been a campus that we've seen a ton of headlines from out of Florida this year. And that's because they've created this sort of amazing conservative hostile takeover of an institution that is the smallest public college in Florida. It's very, 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 very small. And what people said about it before this takeover happened was that it was the queerest campus that you could think of. It was attractive specifically to LGBTQ students. And when Christopher Rufo took this position, he said that he was going to be part of fighting the feminization of the American university, which they all sort of, DeSantis, Rufo, people throughout the government of Florida are targeting as the real crime of America, the thing that's destroying American society, the fact that there are queer and trans people that are able to join educational systems as themselves and not immediately be targeted or suppressed or condemned for that, right? And so specifically at New College, I say that because a quarter of the student body left between the 22-23 school year and the current academic year. And the way that they've handled the drop in student body is to create sports teams, athletic teams, so they could aggressively recruit male students and only offer them scholarships, specifically a disproportionate amount of scholarship funding. And this is public funds. This is a state college, right? And so I give that example just to say that even in the places in Florida that are historically the most protected for these communities, which have always existed for decades, right? Queer people are not like a new advent in Florida, whether or not that's how we talk about them, and trans people as well. The people in Florida who are a part of DeSantis's campaign are doggedly and aggressively trying to intimidate young people, and whether that's K through 12 students, as we saw in the example at the top, or college students who we often forget because we infantilize them, either because they're, you know, just recently joined the ability to vote, or because we see them as, you know, student loan burdens, the way we talk about Gen Z as if they're just trying to like spend their parents' money or whatever. We completely dismiss the fact that these are 18-year-olds, 20-year-olds accessing healthcare for the first time in a state where trans healthcare has been vastly criminalized, right? And that, though we talked about this before, though the suggestion is that it focuses on young people, that it's protecting kids.
Yeah, the guise is they're trying to protect kids, but it's really more nefarious, right? It's to advance a narrative, which is if you don't look like me, talk like me, act like me, you're not welcome here.
Right.
So where are these young people fleeing to, and is there any hopes of, do you think, them coming back to Florida?
Right. So this is a question I had to ask everyone I talked to. And as you mentioned, I drove across several cities in Florida, but I also ended up having to go to Western Massachusetts for one of the stories, because with New College in particular, at least 35 students transferred from New College of Florida to Hampshire College in Western Mass, because they actually had to launch like a transfer program encouraging New College students to come, because so many professors and academics were really horrified by this disproportionate attack. So one of the people I spoke to at Hampshire, her name is Libby Harity. She's 20 years old. She was the student body president until she allegedly spat at Chris Rufo at a protest in May. In July, and this is all publicly reported by the Times, by the Tampa Bay Times, she was informed by the university that if she did not self-select to remove herself, she would be expelled, facing criminal charges for assault, would lose all of her campus responsibilities, so her jobs, her employment, and also being a student body president, unless she transferred herself to Hampshire. So this person who had never lived outside of Florida before and is 20 years old just moved to Massachusetts with 2 weeks before the semester started, right? Just like completely had to move her entire life to a place she's never been before. So that's just one person, and we now know Western Mass, there's going to be all these students.
But these are people that are young, smart, the futures of America that are now having to find safe havens. A, maybe they've never even lived outside of Florida, or B, because they just can't be who they are. Right. The biggest fear, I think, and unfortunately I only got like 30 seconds left.
Oh, sorry.
No, it's okay. No, see, this is an important conversation, and I want to have you come back and talk about it. But the biggest fear I have, though, is this is not just centered in Florida.
Of course.
This is a national dialogue that needs to be had, because it's not just in our state, right?
Right. Absolutely. And I think, what I'll say before we got to wrap up is that if you're looking at DeSantis and everything that he's doing it to open the Overton window for these things to happen in other states, which is what we're seeing, right? And so if you look at how DeSantis is among the first governors to really target a Students for Justice in Palestine chapter in Florida, that he is at the forefront of that. If you look at the fact that truthfully, the climate martyr who died in Atlanta over the fight for Cop City, truthfully was from Tallahassee. And so these communities in Florida are shaking nationwide.
Lex McMenamin, thank you for being here.
Thank you.
Amazing. You're doing amazing work. I appreciate it. And up next, the